I am thrilled to introduce our guest today, Dr. Paris Jean. She is a licensed counseling psychologist, an author, and an assistant professor of psychology at Towson University. Her work is a powerful blend of academia, advocacy, and direct practice, all unified by a commitment to Black wellness and Black liberation. Dr. Jean's expertise is rooted in areas like Black psychology, Black feminism, multicultural psychology, and trauma-informed care. Her research focuses on developing individual and community-level interventions to support the wellness of trauma survivors, specifically within the Black community. She is a recognized advocate for social justice, having received multiple awards, including the prestigious 2022 APA-APAGS Distinguished Graduate Student in Professional Psychology Award. Dr. Jean is also the co-founder of the Collective Academics for Black Survival and Wellness. And if that wasn't enough, she is the author of the empowering new workbook, Strategically Navigating Anti-Black Racism in Professional Spaces, which provides practical skills for addressing anti-Black racism in the workplace. As a Black psychologist, Dr. Jean will be discussing her recent publication and workbook, The Strategically Navigating Anti-Black Racism and Professional Spaces, Decision-Making Model for Black graduate students and early career professionals. Dr. Jean, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I had a chance to read the article, which my understanding is born out of your dissertation.
Yes.
And then it led from there to now this published book.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely made my dissertation work for me, I guess. But yeah, so the first kind of publication that came about from my dissertation was actually the workbook, because I wanted to prioritize like getting this information out to the Black community in a way that was accessible. And so when I had the opportunity to work with a publisher to turn it into a workbook, really decided that I wanted to prioritize that, and then also still have the academic article come out. But it almost felt like a kind of form of like resisting the traditional kind of academic approach to things of like trying to accumulate articles and citations and all of those things, which are important and valuable, but also like prioritizing and centering, getting it out to the communities that it's intended for.
Yeah, getting it out to the communities first and then follow it up with the academic material. I mean, that's not to say that your material and ideas is not born out of also the academic literature. Yeah. So for our listeners, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about this decision-making model?
Sure. So this was a decision-making model that came about from a qualitative study with 10 Black graduate students and then 10 early career professionals. And so we had focus groups where they were provided with vignettes. So there were 3 vignettes that were very similar in nature, but they kind of described experiences of racism in the workplace. And they were differentiated by kind of the level of the perpetrator of the anti-Black racism. So one would be like a colleague, someone on the same level as you, then a subordinate, and then someone that was like a superior to you. And so the intention behind that was to really get at how sometimes our responses to racism in the workplace can be impacted by the level of power and privilege that we may have within that hierarchical structure, whether that's in the grad school or the early career setting. And then also, depending on if it was for the graduate students or the early career professionals, there were some details that were slightly changed to make it more relatable to the graduate experience or the early career experience. And so from there, being able to use constructivist grounded theory to identify a decision-making model. So what were the different considerations that participants talked about when they were responding to the vignettes, but then also in the follow-up focus groups when they were asked more detailed questions about their decision-making process. And so being able to kind of pull out what that looks like, and that ultimately led to the decision-making model, which is not necessarily giving you like, oh, if this happens, do this, but more so things to assess, to consider when you're thinking about how you want to respond, because a lot of times Black folks will report feeling very taken aback and frozen when they experience racism at the workplace, and they often have so many things going through their mind because there's that added layer of being in a professional setting, that's often associated with your livelihood and all of those things. And so this model kind of allows people to think about this even before they have an encounter of racism at work or in their graduate setting, but then also when they do have that experience, be able to kind of work through the model, or even after, think about how they would have liked to respond or how they can respond in the future.
Yeah, how they can respond in the future, as well as how can you actively seek community and support,
Hmm.
which is also outlined in part of the decision-making
Yeah.
model. So now I actually want to read the prompts just so because when I read the prompt, to me, I am shocked, and yet at the same time, I can see it totally happening.
Hmm.
Which, so let me just kind of read the prompt here,
Yeah.
the vignettes for folks. And I also appreciate the flexibility because, like you're saying, you're not approaching this from a algorithmic
Hmm.
approach, style, which is, oh, if this, then that. There's really
Right.
a lot of flexibility. So I think the vignette essentially was. Let me just read this out here. In the vignette, the Black graduate student or earlier career professional is working on a group presentation with one of the aforementioned groups. For instance, either what is it where the individual is
Like a colleague
a
or
colleague, a
subordinate.
supervisor, yeah, a supervisor or subordinate,
Hmm.
and notices that they are using images that perpetrate negative stereotypes about Black people. And in each instant, the Black graduate student or early career professional shares her concern about changing the PowerPoint slides. Then, during the presentation, the Black graduate student or early career professional notices that the individuals decides to use a different version of the PowerPoint without her changes included. So, I mean, it's so dismissive, right? It's
Hmm.
like you're providing feedback, say, hey, there are images that represent, you know, Black people that are biased, right? They're
Right.
racist, negative, and please revise that. Well, why is it so difficult? Anyways,
Hmm.
that is just baffling, right? And then you see
Yeah.
this happening.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that we did was also pilot these vignettes with folks that were not a part of the actual like focus group studies, but we piloted, and it was a way, one, for the research team that I was working with to also practice like the questions we were going to ask, but also to get feedback. Like, does this feel realistic? Does this feel like a situation that you have encountered or you've heard other people encountering? And we got some really great feedback of like, yeah, like this is something that happens, and also it touching on kind of like multiple decisions that people might have to make, right? So you're having that decision making of like, I'm working on this group project with them. I'm noticing an issue. Do I bring it up? How do I broach it? But then also, when we end up doing the presentation and I'm made aware that they ignored my feedback and actually did something different, how do I like address that in the moment as well? Do I say something during that meeting, or do I just kind of let it be, say something after? And then also, how do I communicate? Because there's also a piece of the vignette about like the supervisor, being like, oh, this is a great presentation or whatever, and even asking how you feel about the presentation. So do I tell that
Yeah, do I tell the
supervisor
truth or do
what
I say,
happened?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And so we wanted it to also have like multiple points of decision making in terms of how to respond to that anti-Black racism, because it was happening in various degrees throughout the
yeah.
vignette.
And I think I want to point out the subtlety and nuance of the varying degrees.
Hmm.
There's the presentation, like the covert, racism, which is including negative stereotypes of Black people,
Right.
and then the overt, which is changing the PowerPoint
Hmm.
after the Black graduate student or early career professional express their concerns. So there's
Exactly.
two forms, and of course you're thinking about, wow, how do I respond to that? And
Hmm.
then, like you said, if you have a supervisor asking you for feedback, gosh, I mean, how is the supervisor looking at you? Are they saying, "Oh, this is great," and you
Right.
need to lie to me, and and so that's I think such a great example. It illustrates something that's very practical and real. So, in thinking about this decision making model, I have some reactions about it
Hmm.
actually when I was reading it.
Yeah.
Before I get into that, I'm curious if there's anything else you want to draw out or bring to life with this model for our listeners.
Yeah, I would also highlight that one of the things I wanted to be intentional about with this model and also with the workbook is not saying like, oh, there's one right way to respond, right? So a lot of times there can be messaging that we get, and you can think about this with many racial ethnic minority groups. We get certain messages about like the ideal way to be as a Black person, the ideal way to be as a person of color. And so sometimes that can make us feel like there's only one or two okay responses for me to have. And so with the way that the decision making model is framed, it's like you're making a decision based on what is best for you and what are the kind of needs that you have at that moment. So one of the components is assessing your mental and emotional well-being in terms of how you respond. So there are times in your life where you may have more or less mental and emotional capacity, and that influencing how you respond. So there may be times where it's like, okay, I'm going through some things in my personal life, I'm grieving, or something may be going on. I may not have the emotional capacity to educate someone about why they're being anti-Black. And so that may influence my response. But then there may be someone who at that particular moment in their life, they do have more emotional capacity, or they do have more investment in like, I'm going to try to help this person become better, right? So that person may take the route of naming what's happening, educating the person about it, having more in-depth conversations. And so rather than saying like one response is better than the other, thinking about, okay, what are the factors that might lead me to make that response? And am I centering what is best for me versus trying to center the perpetrator, which often, as Black people, as people of color, we're often encouraged to center, especially white people, and what they need versus centering what's best for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's thinking about how can you have the resources to
Mm-hmm.
respond in a way that doesn't drain you any further, because this is something that is persistent and happens so
Mm-hmm.
often, and you have to pick your battle.
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciate that with this decision making model, you also accounted for what happens when, say, and I'll just use the word perpetrator or someone
Mm-hmm.
who engages in something that, could be internalized, or it is like, it's not just with white folks,
Mm-hmm.
it's also people of color can
Mm-hmm.
also do this. And so I like that that was also mentioned in your
Mm-hmm.
paper.
Yeah, and there was also, and I didn't get too much into it in this paper because I think it would be kind of a separate study, but folks also talked about other Black people that may have internalized anti-Blackness and how that impacts them. But in the context of folks that are people of color, some of the participants, they would talk about expecting there to be some like camaraderie or like, okay, we're all trying to navigate white supremacy, and there being some disappointment when it seems like the person is choosing to align more with the harmful kind of white supremacist narratives and anti-Blackness rather than aligning with another person experiencing marginalization. And so one of the components is also thinking about your investment and connectedness with the Black community and also the broader people of color community, because there were participants that maybe they felt like, okay, I'm more invested and aligned with making sure things are okay for the Black community because I haven't necessarily had the experiences where there's solidarity with people of color. But then there were some people who were like, no, I see this as like a universal shared experience for folks that are racial ethnic minorities. And so I think that, again, there's not one right or wrong way, but there is, like, based on your experiences, how you may navigate certain situations. And I touched a little bit even on different like Black racial identity models that also reflect that some folks feeling just like more camaraderie and alignment with the Black community, and then some kind of seeing that broader universal struggle across other marginalized groups.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like when there is more connection with the Black community and a universal struggle, at least just how I was reading it,
Hmm.
there is a greater sense that we can do this together.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess, this is where I want to just point out some of my reactions when I was reading
Hmm.
this. There's a part of me that I felt sad and disheartened
Hmm.
in a way that, wait a second, I have to go into professional spaces priming myself to
Hmm.
think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was some of the reactions I had. And
Yep.
it's like, wait a second. It's like, when I think about anxiety, I treat anxiety and
Hmm.
OCD, my specialty. So I'm already primed and ready, essentially, to have to deal with this garbage.
Hmm. Yeah, and it can be very anxiety producing, right? Because unfortunately, many Black people do have these experiences. And if we even think about racial socialization, oftentimes Black children have conversations about the likelihood and the anticipation of experiencing anti-Black racism at a very early age. And sometimes parents or caregivers may be like, I don't necessarily know if I want to have that conversation because I don't want to make them fearful. But then they also have to deal with the reality that there is a high likelihood that their child may experience something like that, and they would rather them know what's happening, right? Because what can happen if we don't have language for what we're experiencing, we might start to blame ourselves, right? And so we might start to be like, well, maybe that's not what happened. And if you don't have anyone to really validate or bounce that off of, folks can start to really internalize that, and that can even be more harmful. But you're right, it is very like sad, and it can be also upsetting that there's so much. You see how like intricate the model is, right? All of this is going on in the background of people doing their job, right? In the background of
Yes.
people trying to go to grad school. Like you have all this in the back of your mind, and you're still expected to perform like everyone else. And so it can take a extreme emotional toll for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and so that was, a lot of what I was reacting to
Mhm,
and when I was reading this. At the same time, that the model does provide hope that, hey,
mm,
when you encounter this, there are ways in which we can navigate this space together. And
mhm,
so I think there's an element of hope, again, born out of that suffering and sadness. So I
mhm.
really appreciate reading this paper. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
sharing this.
yeah,
And so now, I guess, I'm thinking about this work. I mean, a dissertation and also this book. So
yeah.
that's a lot. So, can you share with us any memorable events and circumstances that
Mhm.
influenced how you got into this work?
Sure. So I think at a pretty young age for me, I knew that I wanted to do something related to the Black community, and I kind of knew I wanted to do something in mental health. And as I like got more educated about the field and things like that, I was able to kind of narrow down into what I want to do. But something very memorable was my transition from undergraduate to grad school. So I went to an HBCU, so a historically Black college or university, and I went to Hampton University. And I had a really great experience there. It was really beautiful to be able to see like the diversity within Blackness and meet people from all different backgrounds, all different experiences. And also that experience like ingrains like a foundational confidence within you, right? So you're not one of the only anymore. You're not like speaking for the entire race, right? You're able to really flesh out other aspects of your identity. And so I went into my PhD program right after graduating from Hampton. I think I moved to Florida like maybe a month or so after I graduated. And it was a culture shock because I was going into a PhD program at a predominantly white institution, and I was also in the South. And really, all I knew about Florida was Disney World and like palm trees. And that was not where my university was located. So I really did not necessarily do my due diligence, I guess, about where I was going per se. And so there was a lot of culture shock in that I was now one of a few Black folks, and I was also being confronted with a lot of anti-Black experiences within my program, but then also within like just navigating the town that I was in, right? And so it started to take a toll on me. It took a toll on me emotionally, mentally. And one of the things that was really helpful was being able to talk to other Black students that were in the cohorts above me. And so they would often pour into the Black students that were in the, I guess, in the cohorts behind them and say, like, okay, this particular professor is anti-Black. And so this is how we have learned to navigate this person. Because as you may know from like your own training, we're also being evaluated in terms of our professionalism, how we may show up as therapists, right?
I put air
And
quotes.
yeah,
Yes.
right, a very narrow view of professionalism. And so oftentimes they would talk about like having certain people that would pathologize how we show up as like Black folks in an environment that is not necessarily emotionally safe, but then being told we have to be vulnerable, right? So we would talk about like strategic vulnerability to show what needs to be shown for our evaluation, but also not expose ourselves to hurt and situations where people around us are not even equipped to support us. And so I would have these conversations with them, and it was very helpful. And so Then when cohorts started to come behind me, I found that I was having the same conversations with other Black students that were coming behind me. And we would often have to have like meetings after the meetings, like after class, after different experiences of anti-Blackness to validate each other and then also strategize about how we're going to make it through. In addition to that, I was also working at the counseling center. And so I was co-facilitating Black therapy groups with undergrads and graduate students. And so I was also hearing about the experiences of folks that did not even have what I had, right? They were literally the only Black person in their program. So they weren't able to get that navigational capital from a person, a cohort above them. And so seeing that, I was like, I think that there needs to be some type of decision-making model, right? We're having all these conversations and we're being confronted with a lot of situations where we need to respond to the anti-Black racism that's coming up in the classes or that's being done to us, or the harmful things that may be being done with like people's approaches to research and how they're treating Black folks. And so I thought, okay, I want my dissertation to be about that because ultimately I'm a very practical person. And so I like for my research and pretty much anything I'm doing to actually have some like real world applications. And so those experiences led me to want to do my dissertation on that subject matter. And then also I was really blessed to have members of my like program, the cohorts behind me, that were also invested in like helping me with that dissertation because with qualitative research you can't really do things alone. So it was really
Yeah, you need
important
a
to
team.
have, yeah, it was
Yes.
really important to have that team. And they were there for me. They helped with conducting the focus groups. They helped with analyzing the data, all of those things that I really did need to make sure this was a rigorous and helpful research project. So those were kind of some of the memorable events I can say.
Yeah. And I have to say, a very strong team
Yeah.
because, and I say this because each team member listed their positionality
Hmm.
and I mean,
Hmm.
truly diverse. I was amazed because I myself have done some semi-structured or mixed methods research
Hmm.
and there were qualitative components. And I understand the importance of having diversity and perspective. And it was amazing to see that in your paper. So I think you address the challenges, so I don't need to
Hmm.
ask that question. But
Yeah.
yeah, so Dr. Jean, for you, what does it mean to be a Black psychologist?
Yeah. Well, one, I want to say, for me, being a Black psychologist is truly an honor. And I think it's a culmination of investment from like my ancestors, my family, my friends, my elders, my community. Because sometimes we get into these positions where we have the academic degrees and we have all these experiences. And it's also important to acknowledge the embodied knowledge, the community investment that led you to this point, right? So yes, there's a lot of things I learned through my graduate education, my undergraduate education, but there's also a lot that I learned from my community, my family, from those who maybe did not have access to these educational opportunities, but nonetheless taught me what healing means. And so for me, it means using my privilege and my access as a psychologist to uplift the strengths of the Black community and to support authentic healing for Black folks. So many times we are given these very deficit-based views of Black people, and that is often perpetuated even in psychology. And so for me, making sure that I am using my academic knowledge to highlight the strengths of Black people and to also then provide resources that are culturally affirming, that are culturally relevant to the communities that I am working on. And so being Black psychologist really is like being able to bridge that gap between embodied knowledge and strengths-based approaches, recognizing the ways that Black folks have healed and supported one another over time, while also using culturally affirming and culturally relevant research and clinical work. So being able to bridge that gap is kind of where I see myself fitting in as a Black psychologist.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for sharing these thoughts and
Yeah.
insights. And again, thank you so much for your time and talking about this decision-making model. You all also have a book out there, so I encourage listeners, please check it out or add it to your syllabus or curriculum. It's a must read. And so, Dr. Jean, any final thoughts?
No, just thank you for having me. And on that note of like the article and the book, there are ways to request that your library has access to it. I think this is definitely a very valuable resource, especially for Black graduate students. And so if you want to incorporate into your class as a resource for your students, definitely see about requesting it at your university library or local library so that folks can access it in an affordable way.
Yeah. And it's not just with graduate students. It's early career
folks too, yeah.
Folks as well, yeah. So if people are, in organizations or have a group practice, please consider this. And it really does speak to your practical perspective and making it translatable and making it available out in the community. Again, Dr. Jean, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.